So thank you for being with us. We will soon begin the main event, maybe in about 25 minutes or so. So while we wait, we'll have a few interviews. The first person is Tina, who is a member of the CAIC, the hosts of today's event. So Tina, thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy to be here all together.
So I think first of all, I should ask you to explain to our viewers, so what exactly is the CAIC?
Okay, great. So CAIC stands for CEIBS Alumni International Chapter. Basically, we are and aim at being even more in the future the home base for all English-speaking alumni. So no matter where our alumni are from and where they are based, as long as they speak English, they should become part of our community and benefit from the events that we organize autonomously, and then together what we also do is help the school strengthen CEIBS internationalization and brand image globally.
So how do you work with the school leadership in all of this?
Okay, great. So, well, clearly, I mean, we all have the same goal. So there's a great collaboration with the leadership. If I just to mention some examples. So, for example, we regularly meet with the president, Lee Ming-jun. We also actively, as a chapter, promote the 1+1 initiative organized by the dean. We are establishing a wonderful relationship with the president-designate, Deepak Jain. We've met for dinners already discussing really the issues, let's say, that are at heart of our community, alumni community. And we also hope to host him as a speaker soon. We have a great relationship with the alumni relation managers on all three campuses, so that's here, Shanghai, Zurich, and Accra. And we also look forward to establishing a great relationship with the newly founded CAA. So there's a lot of work together and collaboration.
All right, great. So I know that recently there have been, or you're in the process of changing the leadership of the CAIC, and you are going to be the incoming Secretary General, but that is pending some additional approval. So tell us a bit about how do you become a member, and as a member, what do you do?
Okay, yeah, just to clarify that first part, so basically we've just had re-elections as a chapter. The chapter was established 3 years ago, officially launched 2 years ago by its founding members to give voice to the international community of CEIBS alumni. Now, just recently, like you just mentioned, we had re-elections, and it's really in the sort of the formal approval phase. So we have all our names of all the members have been published on our key channel, which are our 3 very active WeChat groups, and we are there for, let's say, public approvals in the coming days. The official new leadership and members will be announced. How do you become a member? Well, clearly, I mean, one of the key sort of requirements is to be a CEIBS alumnus, to be passionate about the community, to want to contribute to the community, and that also obviously means to be able to dedicate some time and effort to the community. In terms of tasks, then, I mean, how does everybody contribute? We're a very diverse community, being both in terms of where we come from, but also our backgrounds, our expertise. So we do have different task forces, and everyone, according to their interests and expertise, contributes. So whether you want to help with marketing, whether you want to help with IT, whether you have a great network and you want to help us source speakers, or maybe help with sponsorships, etc. There's really something for everybody, and that's how we've created a team that we all complement each other. We also appreciate we get a lot of operational support every year from the current MBA members who are here on campus, and it's sort of their entry into the alumni community already before they even graduate. So that's another great sort of workforce and support that we have. And even if, someone who doesn't have time, we appreciate simply if people become our ambassadors and make sure our activities are well known, and there's a lot of interaction and support in the community.
So you do have events throughout the year, and you've had some in the past, but today's event, it seems, is a bit special, and I know that you're working with the Indian Association in Shanghai on this. So why was it important for the CAIC to host this event?
Okay, well, yeah, great, exactly. I mean, we do organize a lot of events. This event, we're very, very happy to have Shradha here because she's a highly inspiring entrepreneur, and very important for us to bring value to our community. So to have her here and personally share her story with us as alumni today. We're very grateful to also the collaboration of the Indian Association to be able to host her here together on our campus. I believe her sharing her story, her story here with us on campus today will be highly inspiring for all of us. And I hope, she's in China now. I hope maybe meeting here with us and having a chat with us after this presentation can also be enriching for her, of course.
So I know that after the main speeches, there will be time for Q&A. Maybe you will not get a chance to ask your question. So just in case, if you had the chance to ask one question of today's guest speaker, what would it be?
I guess, I'm looking forward very much to hearing what she shares with us. If she doesn't cover it herself already, clearly, as sort of representing the alumni here, there's many, many entrepreneurs among us, many people who are involved in startups. So I guess what we would want to find out is if at all she has plans to also bring YourStory to China, and if so, when and how that is happening. We would be curious to find out.
Thank you so much, Tina. I'll see you later on. And now we're here with Professor Shameen Prashantham. Am I saying that correctly?
Well done.
All right. So this is our professor here at CEIBS, one of the most popular professors, and you will soon see why. He's moderating today's event, and we have a few more minutes before the event begins, so we're going to have a little chat. So Professor, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, a great pleasure, and very excited to be involved in this event with Shradha Sharma, who is a very well-known figure in India and very inspirational.
So as I said before, you're going to be today's moderator. What is it that you're hoping that we'll get from this discussion?
I think it'll be a great opportunity to learn about and reflect on the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India. India is the other big emerging market apart from China, and both of these countries have seen a lot of exciting developments around entrepreneurship. Shraddha is clearly someone who knows the Indian entrepreneurial context very well. She is herself an example of a successful Indian entrepreneur. So I think it'll be wonderful to get a chance to listen to her and think about this other context. And hopefully that will trigger some interesting discussion during the Q&A and so on about the possible links between these two economies. I remember when Prime Minister Modi had visited China, I think it was around May 2015. So this was about almost exactly a year after he had taken over as Prime Minister in India. And I wrote a little article that was published in an Indian newspaper called The Hindu, pointing out that although India and China are neighbors and such big countries, you think about things like flight connectivity. It's far easier for me to go to London from Shanghai as it would be for me to go from say Delhi or Bombay to London than it is to actually travel between these two countries. And I've always had this sense of unfulfilled potential, in terms of the potential links between China and India. Now, to be honest, it's not that easy for various reasons. And, I think one of the things that'll be interesting to be thinking about are the ways in which entrepreneurs in each of these markets can leverage the other in some way. I've done a little bit of work. I wrote a paper about a company called InMobi in India, which has been taking the China market seriously. In fact, the reason I was intrigued to pursue that was InMobi was one of 6 or 7 startups that was honored with a Person of the Year award by a leading broadcaster in India. And in the acceptance speech that the person from InMobi made, he made it a point to say that he was very proud of the success the company had in China. And you don't have that many examples of young Indian companies doing that. Another company that I've recently been looking at called Capillary Technologies, again, seems to be taking the Chinese market seriously, and I'm developing a teaching case about that. So, it'd be interesting to have some discussion around the possibility of seeing more of these sort of connections across these two countries.
So you've mentioned some of the stuff that you've worked on in the past, and we know that one of your areas, your niche areas, is looking at how startups partner with big multinationals.
That's right.
So you've spoken about InMobi and so on. So what's next? What can we look for from you next?
You know, just in the last couple of weeks, some of the things I've been doing. Last week, I was in Silicon Valley conducting interviews about how companies are partnering with startups. Then over the past 4 days, I was doing this intensive bit of teaching on our global EMBA program for a core course on entrepreneurial management. And by far the session that triggered the most, provoked the most discussion was the one in which I talked about entrepreneurship in the context of a large company and how one way in which they try to enhance the entrepreneurial culture, innovation with the companies by talking to startups. Right before this event, I was at the offices of Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, talking to a group of digital startups that they are have brought into their premises for 3 months. So what I'm trying to say by all of this is there seems to be a growing interest in a phenomenon I've been trying to study for well over a decade. In fact, it was almost exactly 10 years ago that I published a paper in California Management Review with Julian Birkinshaw called Dancing with Gorillas. And the point there was, with difficulty, but if they put in the effort, startups might be able to usefully partner with large corporations, but you could get trampled in the process, so be careful. Over time, it seems as if some gorillas at least have learned how to dance. And so what I'm trying to understand better is how this is happening. So a couple of things that I'm trying to tease out is this piece on the how, looking at some of the practices that these big gorillas are putting in place to reach out to startups. And it's very interesting that now there is an emergence of third parties, specialist third parties that are trying to help bridge these two very disparate sets of organizations. And when that sort of thing happens, that it's become a thing, And the other thing that I'm trying to explore is the where, meaning that these large corporations are engaging with startups, but how it happens in advanced markets is a bit different from how it's happening, say, in China and India. And even between China and India, there are differences in terms of the way the ecosystems are, the role of the government in particular, some of the areas that the startups are pursuing. So a couple of months ago, I had this digital article in Harvard Business Review teasing out some of these differences between China and India. In the past, when I've posted articles of mine on LinkedIn, I've got a few hundred views, and I've thought, oh, that's quite nice. But with this one, it got almost 10,000 views. And I get the impression it struck a chord, both because corporations are increasingly thinking about working with startups, but don't necessarily know how to do it. But I think more importantly, there is this genuine interest in emerging markets. And again, the talk that we have today plays into this broader discourse around entrepreneurship in emerging markets.
So exciting things ahead for you. Would you believe that there is any possibility of collaborating, for example, with today's speaker?
I think in general, there's a lot of scope for exploring more how one can collaborate between China and India. And so I think, for example, the CEIBS Alumni Network, especially those of Indian origin, some of whom have stayed on in China, some of whom have gone back to India, represent a very important bridge. I was just talking to someone today who said there's now a new alumni group of Indian business school grads based in China, and about 40 of them have banded together, and I think that's interesting. So anything that can contribute to greater dialogue across these two markets, and actually it's quite surprising that it's not so straightforward. The links between China and the West, or reaching out to the West from India, somehow has seemed far more straightforward in many ways. And so anything that can contribute towards the building of the China-India corridor, if you will, would be helpful. And yes, I think Shraddha is better placed than most to provide insight into the Indian ecosystem. And I would be more than happy to explore with her how those of us based in China can contribute towards the connections between these two countries. And I think, frankly, the more people from both sides get to know each other, talk to each other, then you begin to see the shift from just talking about it as a theoretical possibility and then actual things happening on the ground. And right now that gap is quite huge. But I keep hearing Chinese entrepreneurs telling me that they are very interested in the Indian market. I keep hearing Indian entrepreneurs saying, we're curious about the Chinese market. And I think the more these opportunities are explored, the more we'll begin to see interesting cross-border initiatives.
Thank you so much. We look forward to more during the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the CEIBS Alumni International Chapter and the Indian Association, we welcome you in this classroom. We are very honored to welcome Shradha Sharma. So thank you, Shradha, for being with us today. We are very much looking forward to this talk. Thank you also to Mukesh Sharma, without whom this event would not have been possible. This event is done in partnership with the Indian Association. Thank you, Mukesh, for this. Thank you also to Professor Shameen, who has been very busy these last few days with the Gemba 17, I believe, right, on campus. But you did not hesitate for a second to be here with us and accept the challenge of moderating today's Q&A. So thank you very much for that. Also, it gives me great pleasure, like always, to see your glowing and energetic faces. Welcome Gemba, EMBA, MBA, FMBA, here in the classroom, but also in Accra and in Zurich, because this event is being streamed and broadcasted lively. A few words before I give the floor to Shradha. We have a few upcoming events. The next event will be September 28th in Berlin. The German chapter is organizing an alumni reunion. Of course, we hope to see you over there. We have a next speaker event planned on October the 21st with the CEO of Shunfeng. Again, we hope to see you here. And a networking mixer planned in the downtown area around, I believe it is November the 9th. November the 9th. It is November the 9th. I will not take too much of your time. I would love you if you would join me in warmly welcoming on stage Shradha.
Thank you so much, Cedric. Before I begin, let me just put a disclaimer that, the company I run is called YourStory. So I listen to stories of people, and I've been doing that for the last 10 years. So whenever I get a chance to tell my story, it's very rare and I get nervous. And I just then start blabbering and I speak too much. So I'm going to keep it short, precise. So help me to make this session very interactive so that if you are here in the room, then I'm able to value your time and answer some of the questions that you might have. So we will keep it engaging. But before, so I hope that's okay with all of you. That's fine? Yeah? Just to introduce myself, I started YourStory in 2008. To give my background, I was born and grew up in India. And the one thing which I say that I am very proud of and known for is that I grew in the most backward state of India, which is Bihar, and it's also one of the most difficult space for women. And I think the great fire and drive came in me because I grew up in Bihar, which is in the north of India. And one thing which I always, as a child, I always used to believe, because the realities were very difficult, is that all of us can live in possibilities. And how do the possibilities and how do, things happen? How do you think? How do you think about hope? How do you think about a better tomorrow? And all those things happen in stories. And I knew that stories are very powerful because there's a possibility. You know, it's like it's a map. It doesn't give you the destination, but it gives you a path. And that's how after my education in Bihar in India, I joined print, Times of India. It's a newspaper, and then after that I worked in a news channel called CNBC, and I realized that okay, there has to be more to stories than the way the media tells stories. And that's how in 2008 I started YourStory. And I named it YourStory because somewhere I thought, and this is just not to do with India, but across the world. You see it in Europe, you see it in US in a big way, you see a little bit of it also in China, you see it across the world. We are all becoming very consumerist and we are all becoming very obsessed with our own selves. So, you know, we are always thinking about our own story. And when we are thinking and talking about our own story, we've just forgotten to listen to the other person and their story. So I thought we are all thinking about my story and it's about me. And if as people we are only thinking about ourselves, then who's going to listen to your story? And that's how I named the platform YourStory. And I said, without bias, without judgment, I'm just going to listen to your stories. And I'm going to listen to the stories of all the people whom the world considers not cool, not happening, not successful. You know, because all of us, if today in place of me there was some very big celebrity, this hall would be packed because we all want to listen to the story of some big global superstar. But I thought the possibilities of in everyone to have a great story is tremendous. It's just that we have to listen. And that's how the platform YourStory started. Today, it's 2018. In the last 10 years, we have told stories of 80,000 people. We reach 10 million people across the world and primarily in India. And we are the largest platform for entrepreneurs in India. Just took a baby step in, expanded to Germany. And this is just a baby step to come to China and explore. How can we have combined stories? Because the narrative in India and China is a lot written by politics, economy, but I think the possibilities and hope when we have the heroes here connecting to the heroes in India, magic can happen. And that's why I'm here, and that's my story. I told you my story so that you can understand whatever bullshit I'm going to do, that okay, it doesn't come from a place of nonsense, it comes from a place of 10 years of lot of love, lot of hard work, and lot of listening to stories. Now to what I'm sure all of you want to know is what is happening in India. What is the startup story which is brewing up in India? And if you see, India is a very old, like China, India has a very rich, but it's a very old country. But when it comes to independence, it is, and getting its freedom, it's a very, very young country. So it's a great paradox. One of the oldest civilizations in the world, Indus Valley civilization, first footprint of humanity and human beings, everything, the history happened in that country. But I'm sure all of you know that India was invaded by different clans, communities across the centuries, and India got its independence in 1947. So from that perspective, it's a very, very young country. And we were ruled by Britishers for a long time. And 1947, 15th August, we just celebrated our 72nd independence, was a huge milestone for India. And from 1947 to 1991, because the country was so badly, so badly destroyed and everything was taken away from the country. So the government at that point decided that we'll have socialist economy. So because there was a lot of poverty, there were a lot of issues. So how do you create food, how do you create livelihood for everyone? And then that's why our first prime minister that time created a socialist economy. But what it also meant is that from 1947 to 1991, India was a very slow growing economy. We could debate about it and discuss the merits of socialism, communism, democracy, but while it led to upliftment of poverty, but it was growing very slowly to the point that in 1991 India faced a huge financial crisis, and that's when the country opened its market. And 1991 was the year of change. And one thing which we became very famous for and India was notorious for is the IT services industry. So, I don't know I'm sure if you've heard anything about India, you would have heard about all the jobs of, the IT services, back-end jobs, data entry jobs, everything going to India. We had a lot of IT services because it was mostly because of low income talent pool that you were getting in the country. But the interesting point is that 1990 onwards, when India opened to the world, there were a lot of companies from US, from Europe, from all over the world which started coming because the economy was open, and a lot of interesting things started brewing up. There were more opportunities. Indians were getting exposed to what is happening around the world, which we did not have. If you see, till 1991, we were not exposed to that. And to me, the biggest innovation happens because of two things. One is education, and second is exposure. And India started getting exposure from 1991. One of the big things also is that a lot of Indian students, and here I'm talking in a MBA college, a lot of Indian students started traveling across the world. If you see the best talent in maths, engineering, one of the studies and it was out and talked about a lot. If you look at Silicon Valley, 1 out of every third entrepreneur in Silicon Valley is an Indian guy, like the third co-founder in all the companies. And look at the CEOs of Microsoft, Google, you just name it. Because India has always focused heavily on education, and we've had some of the best talent coming. So the talent pool was there, and they were getting exposed now to the global economy, global solutions. So basically what I'm saying is that from 90s onwards, from a closed economy, India became an open economy, lot of exposure, students going outside, lot of companies coming to India. So it was basically a potpourri of lot of action and lot of exposure, and that laid foundation to what I am very driven about and my heart is the startup ecosystem. I'll just move. Now, if you see, 2008, when I started YourStory, there were these companies which had come in India, be it in Bangalore, which is supposed to be the startup hub, and India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. First is US, second is Israel, third is India. As of now, we have tracked 41,000 startups. And I feel that in Bangalore, if you knock in every door, outside every house, either someone is doing a startup or someone is planning to start up. So the country has become like a startup nation. Of course, be it the government, which is completely pushing the startup agenda, be it all the colleges which have a startup cell, accelerator, all the corporates which are working in India who have a fund or who have an accelerator program. So India, to me, is, in its own interesting way, because of the number of people that we have. We have 1.3 billion people, and it's the largest consumerist, growing, emerging middle class economy. And that's why it's a great opportunity for startups. I'm sure all of you would have, how many of you here know of Flipkart? You would have, right? Because of the exit and the news, it got a $16 billion exit to Walmart. As of today, I read that Warren Buffett is looking at investing in Paytm, which is a payment gateway. So India is becoming an action ground when it comes to players from across the world, because it's an economy which is growing. It's a bet. It's a market on which there's a huge bet, because the GDP, be it the numbers, be it the people consuming goods and services, is just going to grow. And why will it happen? If you look at the context which I gave you, 1947, 1991. So, sorry. I'm just feeling very bad that I'm making you sleep. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting time, and everything, like the building blocks are coming together. If you see, some of the top investors from across the world are here in India, and personally, if I have to say that any market where the bet should be for the biggest innovation, because be it talent pool of engineers, mathematicians, be it the resources, be it the funds, be it the drive and the hope, be it the chaos and the challenges, and that paves for a great number of opportunities, India is the place, and I'm very excited to be coming from India. And it's also a space, it's also, a time where it would be great, because India is looking outwards. Currently, the Prime Minister of the country is looking outwards. And one of the big agendas which I have with this trip is to see how India can collaborate more with China. How can we have more information flowing about India in China and about China in India? Because what we read are still from traditional newspapers. These are still politically driven narratives and agenda, but stories, hope, aspirations are built not by political narratives, but on ground by young people. India is the youngest economy with youngest demographic. China is a very large market with similarly very ambitious people, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to collaborate. And and that's why I'm here, and that's my story about Indian startups. And I'm hoping that I'm not blabbering too much, because I see some of you sleeping. And I wouldn't like that, because that would be rude of me to continue talking. So with that, I would request Professor Shameen, if you could, yeah.
So Shraddha, wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much for giving us this nice overview of how the Indian economy has been developing, and now how you have this startup scene. Just on a personal note, one of the things about your background that I personally find interesting is that you didn't grow up in one of the big cities in India. I'm the same, except from the other end of the country. So I grew up in a town called Vellore.
Of course.
And you grew up thinking that you ultimately had to get to one of the big cities and see the world from that perspective. So it's always very nice to see people who have come who have proven that wonderful things can happen and come out of all kinds of places. So towards the end of your remarks, you were talking about how it's important to have these personal connections across the countries, and I couldn't agree more. And I think part of the difficulty is that even just physical connectivity between the two countries, isn't great. You could go from Shanghai to London or from Delhi to London far more easily than you could go between these two cities, even though they're actually more proximate and culturally or historically have had cultural links and so on. So I'm very happy to be hearing about that. So maybe we can sort of kick off by talking a little bit about your sense of what the potential you see for Indian startups exploring the Chinese market or the other way around.
Thank you, and good to know you're from Vellore. I would say right now there is a lot of curiosity among Indian startups. One of our biggest strengths and also our drawback has been that India is such a huge market that when startups are building, more often than not, they're building for Indian market. I would say there's an opportunity for Indian startups to come and see if they can collaborate and partner with startups here in China, because there's so many services, products coming up. Like, we have an equivalent of Didi, though I heard today there was a sad news for Didi, about Didi today. But in India, we have an Uber equivalent and better.
Ola.
Ola, which has a very strong hold in the market, and it is just growing. We have lots of solutions. You name the sector, and we have startups, and with huge catchment. Now, can they expand here? I heard that Oyo, which is into affordable guests rooms and hotels, budget hotels, has expanded and is expanding to China. So I think there'll be a huge opportunity to find those right partners and partner. Now the question is, and the big question is, how do you find those right partners? How do you get to know the ecosystem? How do you go on ground? Because China is so huge and the ecosystems are so dispersed. And similarly for India, I think people are coming between both the countries, getting a sense, but I think we need to collaborate there to create a platform where people can genuinely partner.
Absolutely, and I suppose that's where the Indian Association in China can be a bridge. Also the CEIBS Alumni Association, which has many people who came from India to study at the school and then have stayed on. But I fully agree with you. And also in the spirit of you talking about stories of startups, one of the interesting moments for me was a couple of years ago, I think, when one of the leading broadcasters in India, NDTV, announced its Person of the Year as the Indian startup. And, there were about 6 or 7 Indian unicorns that were joint recipients of this award. And the person who received the award on behalf of InMobi made it a point to say, we are particularly proud that we have had success in China. And, I had some discussions thereafter with the China CEO of InMobi and wrote a little article. Another startup that, no longer maybe a startup, but a relatively young company that has also been taking the Chinese market very seriously is Capillary Technologies. And right now, I'm in the midst of writing a teaching case because I teach a course on international entrepreneurship. And I think it'll be very interesting to talk about or think about how Indian startups can come into China. And as it happens, the guy who is spearheading that effort is sitting in this room. So if you don't mind, maybe we can even hear a little bit about Capillary story. Amit, if you don't mind, would you like to come up and maybe for a couple of minutes tell us a little bit about what your experience is of taking on the Chinese market?
Yep. So thanks a lot, Professor Shameen, for your words. I think Shraddha is aware of Capillary. I think Krishna and myself, we met you long back. I think we, so a couple of things taking a point of what Shraddha was saying. I think first is on collaborating with the local ecosystem. And second is finding the right partner, right? I think when we moved here, and for the broader audience, Capillary is a retail CRM platform. And when we moved here, the ecosystem here is on WeChat, etc. So we didn't have a way to understand how we'll integrate with WeChat. So the first piece was really to understand what is it that retail and e-commerce companies do on WeChat. And the way to do that was, first to hire our first 2 or 3 people, build that team, and then basically just attend as many, Chinese startup events as possible, similar to YourStory, 500 Startups, China Accelerator, etc., and really understand what is it that brands are doing and where is the industry moving. Once that happened, we went with some ideas and bounced it off to our customers and asked them to kind of validate whether some of this works or doesn't. And then we did something interesting. We found through these startups and the network that we had built, we found 2 or 3 companies. One of those we built our WeChat integration with. The reason we chose that partner is that the WeChat APIs at that time were available only in Chinese. I mean, the documentation for the technology was available only in Chinese. So we then found this, local partner to kind of work with. And then now, of course, we have our own product and we've built integrations with Ali, etc. We have a 50, 60 member team. We work with larger customers like North Face, Anta. So, but I think the key part, and maybe we chose the right partner for the first 2 years. Maybe we chose the wrong partner. No one will ever know. But I think the reality is that in my experience, it is impossible given the level of difference in language and the ecosystem both, right? It is the compounding effect. If you just have language but ecosystem is the same, you can manage. If the ecosystem is different but language is English, you can manage. But I think both of those complicates that to another level of magnitude. So for us, it was taking a leap of faith, doing a lot of analysis paralysis on partners, but then finally saying, okay, this is the partner, we're going to make it work. And then, 2 years later, we had our own product and we still have good relationships with the partners. So I think that was what our experience was like.
Fantastic, thank you. So here we're already beginning to get another story of what's happening on the ground. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing, these 1 or 2 Indian startups that I've talked to say is they've had to learn to do things from the ground up in China. It's fundamental, it's very different, and so on. And so hopefully as these bridges keep getting built, we'll see a bit more. Before I open up the, to the audience for questions, I just want to ask you one other thing, because more about you and your own story. Because on the one hand, you have told the story of many Indian entrepreneurs. On the other hand, you embody Indian entrepreneurship. And I think you very correctly said that, there was this period when things were slow until 1991, and then there was the exposure. I thought that was a very nice way of putting it. But actually, it's taken a while before the startup ecosystem took off, in a sense. And back in 2008, I've been doing research interviews in Bangalore every year since 2002. And in 2008, startup wasn't even a thing quite by that point. And yet you saw a possibility, but I don't expect it would have been easy back then for you to be getting VC money, the way in which we see startups getting VC money now. From my recollection, it just wasn't there yet. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what it was like being an entrepreneur 10 years ago in India.
When I started, I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur, because I think entrepreneur as a word has become very sexy and talked about and cool. But at that time, it was just that, hey, I worked in these large media companies. I don't think so. They are writing stories which needs to be written. And that was something which was like every night I used to think about this after my work, that these stories need to be written, and these guys, they need to be out there. And I just took the plunge, if I may say so, because I thought that if I'm going to think too much, then I'm not going to. Because, once you get used to a salary, and in CNBC, I was in a senior role, getting good money. So once you get used to that, it's very, very difficult to part with that. So somewhere you have to be a little insane, little crazy. And I thought, okay, if the money is not going to come, I just jumped just to do this because I thought if I don't do it, I'll not feel happy and I'll not be at peace. So let's just do and tell the stories, because if I don't, then nobody's finding it exciting. So that's how I jumped into it. And for 8 years, I think nobody found it exciting. No, for 8 years I bootstrapped because I also knew that a business, something like this, has to make sense. It has to have a scalability, it has to have a market, it has to have a path of growth, path of exit, path of blah, 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 which venture capitalists asks. So in 2015, when I was clear and the company was profitable for 4 years, that's when I raised venture capital money in 2015. And then I raised another round in 2016 and 2017. And so that's my story.
That's a wonderful story. Thank you very much. So I know many of you must have some questions, things you want to ask. Now is the time to do so. Yes, please. If you maybe can just introduce yourself very briefly.
Okay. Thank you, Sharma. Very nice to hear your voice and see your good experience. My name is Fisher. I'm from Global MBA 2009. And I used to be the CFO for different multinational company. And in 2005 or 2015, I quit from multinational company and run my own business as a CFO mentor. Okay.
Wow.
The question I ask you is, it seems your story is, by the time when you create your story, this platform, it seems, I guess it might be the blue sea areas, okay? Maybe nobody else ever did it. So how do you survive from the very beginning, we say the blue seas, and then you try to convince quite a lot of people, and then try to scale your business, and then try to make more and more people to be on your platforms. So this might be the biggest problem for the people who want to create the startups, and then especially in the blue sea areas.
No,
so
I
that's
think
my headache. Really, I want to learn something from you. Okay.
No, but I think that's a very beautiful and a very, very, very relevant question. Actually, you are right. It was blue sea. I think it was black sea because I just couldn't see. I just knew, like, I'm sure you have this thing that you have to do, right? And you have to do, but you don't know how and what. So I would say 2-3 things that work for me is, one is a very crazy consistency. So somewhere I had read as a child, actually, that if you see drops and drops, every drop goes and then suddenly tributary is made and suddenly the big river is made. So for me, and someone said that the network effect, if you see the network effect, every business has some kind of a network effect. For that network effect to happen, you have to every day consistently do the same boring shit. It might be very boring. It might be the most tedious thing. You might just feel like you want to kill yourself, but you have to do the same thing every day, which is like very boring and not glamorous, and nobody calls you to speak and all that, but you have to do it for many, many years, and then suddenly everyone thinks, oh my God, look, this is such a big success. But people don't see the 24/7 literally everyday thing. So that takes time for the network effect to suddenly happen, and people and everything starts falling in place. But the most important thing which I did is I was a little shameless, because I knew nobody is going to come, like I have this joke which I say that nobody is going to come and tell you, oh my God, you are very good. What you're doing is very valuable. Nobody cares a damn. So for me, when I was doing stories of entrepreneurs, I was very consistent, be it Saturday, Sunday, night, day, there was no holiday. So I was just doing this because I knew that if I do it consistently, I didn't see when, but it will happen. Second is, I just went and talked to everyone. You don't know what a psycho I was. I met every possible human being on the planet like I could meet. Sometimes I used to lose my voice because I used to go and talk and say, hey, and with that same enthusiasm, because I somehow believe very strongly, and this is a very Eastern thing, on vibrations. my vibrations, if I touch you, then if I have a good vibration for you, it will come to you. And businesses, we have forgotten that if we have the vibration, which is like, okay, this is going to happen, it just starts happening. And I went and talked to everyone shamelessly. This is the story, look at this. And out of hundreds of people I used to talk, suddenly I am shocked. Like the network became so big after a point, and I was also very shameless to say, can you please help me? Like, can you please help me? Can you please, I have a very funny story to share with all of you. That once there was this big investor conference, and only very selected people were invited for this. You had to be very successful to enter that conference. And I had moved to Bangalore from Mumbai. And it was in a 5-star, very fancy restaurant, and by invite only. And they were checking the invite. In India, we can go, even if we don't get invite, in India, we have a way of getting inside. But this one, you just couldn't. But I was determined that my business opportunity will come from all these men in the room. So I told the lady at the counter, I told her, can you please allow me to go inside? She looked at me and she thought, oh, what a pathetic, miserable woman. So I said, I promise you one thing. If I go inside, even if I talk to 5 people, they will come back and tell you that they had the best conversation. Second, I'm not going to eat the food or drink so I'm not wasting your money. And you can time me. I will go and I'll be back in 30 minutes. And otherwise you can just drag me out. I went and I had some of the best conversation. Just to answer your question, so just to put consistency, 7 days. You can't say, oh, it's a holiday now. Sometimes you have to give up on your sleep. You have to give up on everything. You have to have mad obsession, energy. The positive vibration. You can't be, oh my God, he's an idiot. And then you say, oh, I love to do business with you. That doesn't work. Vibrations matter a lot. Third is network. I have a thing in business. There are 2 kinds of people, givers and takers. Most people we meet are takers. They want to take. But if you are a giver, then you will see life has a way of giving. If you go and say, hey, I'm a CFO and I'm doing mentoring and I'm going to give 10 hours to 20 startups and I'm going to help you. And they might not give you money at all, maybe, because at that time they can't, right? But if you give, you'll be shocked with the way it comes. So for me, it's coming back. So the blue sea is give. Like today I've come for this place. I'm tired. I flew from Hong Kong. This was arranged. I could have said, oh no, because my friend who's come with me, she wanted to go to this French concession. Yeah, we could have gone out. But I thought, okay, let me come, even if 1 or 2 people get something good. Yeah.
Sounds like Fisher is one of those. So be shameless and persistent, Fisher.
Yes.
Other questions? Please, Amit.
Hello. Yeah. You mentioned, Professor Shameen also mentioned about there being platforms for collaboration between Indian and Chinese startups, right? And that's a massive, black sea at the moment, because I've been in this exact space for 3 years, and I've felt pretty lost. So how do you think we can create some of these platforms? What is the starting point? What is like this real tangible way to get this thing started, in your opinion?
I somehow feel it has to happen at a very basic level. So we started something in Germany, and it's very interesting that we got the German government and German startups to come, and a lot of collaboration started happening, and we were very shocked because people are very smart. If you bring 2 smart people in the room, it's like dating, you bring 2 very amazing people in the room, then you just have to get out of the room, right? But it's just finding those two smart people in the room. And we did that. Everyone said, oh, why are you going to German market? Because you don't even understand the language. It's as difficult as China, because here you just don't understand the language. But I think it worked. So similarly, the whole thing is just finding 3-4 people from here and 3-4 people from there, and can they come together and give birth to some magic? And I think that will lead, because the confidence doesn't come, if I say, this big guy came and he did this big thing with this big company, then it looks like PR, and then you feel, something must have. But if two normal people come together, I think then the trust increases. And what we need to do is create trust in India and create trust in China. And that will happen when we have on ground. So I think we'll do that. Because in Hong Kong, I met very interesting investors. It was very surprising. In fact, I'm doing a story. I was shocked, because I am a little skeptical, and I'm sure investors here are skeptical about India. But when I met this guy, I was taken aback, because he met me, and the first thing he says is, he's a Chinese guy, and the first thing he says is, oh, I love China. And I'm like, really? Is he just saying it just for the heck of it, or does he mean it, right? Or maybe he's meeting an Indian, and that's why he's saying, oh, I love India. Sorry. So the Chinese guy, he meets me, and the first thing he looks at me and he says, oh, I love India. And I'm like, yeah, maybe he's a very smart guy. He'll meet some American, he'll say, I love America. But he meant it. And now someone like him, his understanding of it, can we get stories like that and make it very reach people? Trust, drop. I don't think so big events or big things, but it will happen. But I think it should be organic with some transformative stories on the ground.
Super, thank you. Okay, Valentina?
Hi, Shradha.
Hi.
I would like to ask you to talk a little bit more about your business model, and also I'm interested which revenue streams you had at the very beginning and how has it changed during these 10 years?
Yeah, that's a very good
She was one of my students, for the record, hence the very clever question.
Yeah, amazing. No, but that's a very good question. To be very honest, I'll give you, to this good question, I'll give you the most honest answer. Is when I started, I didn't have a business model. I didn't have a business plan. I had nothing. I just had this thing which I was saying is that this is something that needs to be done. And I thought I was very smart, because in media, I had been in print and TV, so I studied the market. Is anyone doing something like that? Nobody was doing it. And when I spoke to all the big guys, investors and people whom I knew, they said, oh, this is rubbish. This is going to be a charity. It's an NGO. You shouldn't do it because you'll never make money. There's no way of making money. But I thought if there is something powerful, if there's going to be some difference which I can create, money will come. I didn't know how. So to answer your first question, I didn't have a business model. When I started in 2008, I didn't know how I'm going to make money. I was just mad. And I think I took some medication for my madness also, just joking. But I was mad at that time. But 2009 and 2010, I started seeing sense, method. So I had done so many stories and I knew data. These were data of people on ground building interesting things in different parts of India. There was the readership which was coming online. I had huge understanding of every entrepreneur and the stories that I had done. In fact, like Capillary, when I had moved to Bangalore, I had met these guys, what they are doing, how they're doing. So you know about these companies much before everyone else gets to know. You understand them much better. So initially the model revolved around, doing fancy big startup events. We have something called tech sparks because services is quicker, right? But then we realized, okay, that's not scalable. That's not like, you don't get VC money or by doing events or by writing content or stuff like that. So today, if you ask, we have the largest reach, digital reach. We have the largest data. And we have the biggest community of entrepreneurs. So community, content, and data. So right now in India, nobody can compete with us on these 3 parameters, and it's taken 10 years. Maybe if I was smarter, it would have taken 2, but I somehow think no, this is a network effect. This business needs a lot of seeding to become what it is, and the revenue, 60% of the revenue comes through content marketing. We work with 140 largest brands across the world who are targeting entrepreneurs and SMEs, and we do co-branded content. If you see in US, 33% of the digital advertising today they do is content led rather than advertising led, because advertising is changing the model around, and Facebook and Google has taken the market. So that is one. Second thing is that we do a lot of data led work. We come up with lots of reports because we have rich data. It's not a static data. These are about businesses, entrepreneurs, sentiments, what they are aspiring. So that's that. And third is, of course, event still is the cash cow because the margins are high. And just this September end, we are launching our subscription product because now we have a huge reach with the government and the corporates. So we're just looking at our pricing, what should be the price. So maybe 10% of our revenue should by next year come from subscription. And and something else which I wouldn't like to say right now. But yeah, so now it's an exciting space. So if you ask me from a revenue standpoint, from the scalability, from the numbers, after 10 years, I can say I'm very excited. Very, very excited, and clear path of how this is just going to, hopefully, if I don't screw it up and my team doesn't screw, if we have, it should go up. Because India is an exciting market, and it's a very, as I said, it's a market where you can rapidly scale once you build the base.
Super, thank you. Shailesh, I saw your hand was up.
Hi, I'm Shailesh. I'm also the same batch as Tina. I have a question. You told about the narratives, like there is a narrative of every house or like every community in Bangalore trying to start up or planning to start up. At the same time, there is another narrative, like India and China always have two very competing narratives at the same time, is that of 24 million people sitting for a government exam for 100,000 seats, particularly in the part of country that I and you belong to. So that's why do you think that your narrative wins and the other one loses?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't think anything or anyone should lose, and I don't think so I should, and my narrative should win. As I said, any narrative is not an indication of win or loss. To me, any narrative is just a path to possibilities, path to hope. Today, I come from a very middle class background. I don't think so I should be standing here in Shanghai and speaking with from the kind of background I come from the kind of family I come from. But the only narrative I had is two things, education, and the other thing is exposure. I think the part where you and I come from, still the exposure is very limited. My mother had cried in 2008. I told you one good narrative, that I started my passion and all that. But my mother had cried and she went into depression when I left my fancy job in CNBC and started YourStory. She said, I have completely destroyed myself. And my mother passed away in 2010. And I still regret every moment that I want to tell her I didn't destroy myself. So what the region, and that holds true in China also, and that holds true in any small town. A Shanghai is very different than you go in the interior of China. Or if an India is very different, Bangalore, then you go to Bihar or in eastern UP, because the exposure is not there. Today, all of us are worried as middle class that we have to have food in our table. We should be, parents die, they say, oh, we'll die very well if you can take care of yourself. What does that mean? That we should have livelihood. And if you look at US surpassed that thing, right? Even if you don't earn there, you get your social, we don't have all those social securities and all that. So I think that will change. Exposure, people like us, people like you, me, we need to go back and we need to say that, hey, you can have a better life, you can survive if you don't give that exam. And I feel it's changing, and it's changing very fast. See, I don't know if people will, I shouldn't name this, but in 1990s and 2000, if you did your engineering, there were 2-3 companies. I don't want to name those companies because I don't know if it's live streaming me, all these, but those were the iconic companies. You had to get a job and your life was settled. Today, if you pass out, you just don't even want to go into those companies, right? Similar, so it will change. It's changing and it will change.
Right. Thank you very much. All right, Pablo, please.
My name is Pablo. I'm also come from the same batch. I'm very curious about media industry, specifically because you commented that you relied a lot on the content marketing and on using existing platforms. However, I personally believe that the way forward should be getting yourself out of these platforms and having direct contact with the customers, not camouflaging brands as content marketing, but just as a subscription model, in which you have a more intimate relationship. So how do you see this going forward? How do you charge Indian consumers a subscription model? And how much are they willing to pay for this?
Yeah. So, just to answer your question, I completely agree with you and I'm with you on that because I feel TV and print were always one-way communication, which is like the journalist or whoever had the information, disseminated information, and it was not democratic. Digital, I feel, is very democratic. And just to answer, let me clarify and go on record to say this, that the content marketing that we do is no camouflaging. So the companies that we work with, be it a Tissot, with whom we do an innovators series, it's called Brand Spotlight. So everything is very clear. So if you go to YourStory, you will very clearly know the 140 companies. Though I wouldn't like you to know if you're my competition, but we have from day one been very clear, so nobody can question, because I believe that I should be standing in front of you and I can speak something with full conviction and honesty, and there shouldn't be anything in my closet. And today all the 80,000 stories and 10 million people who read, they value us because we give them the reach and we are very transparent and open. And of course they make huge noise if they find that we do some ads and all that, but complete transparency. But to answer your question, I think subscription is the way to go. I completely agree with you. More than subscription, I also feel the other model which will have a great future is if you as a reader become content creator, then the distribution of the pie of the brand should go to you as much as to me as a platform and publisher. So if we can create, in like the Bitcoin world or the crypto world, where there is a distribution where everyone makes money rather than the publisher or the platform, I think that future is going to be very, very interesting and very, very scalable. So that is something I'm betting on. And the other thing is subscription. And I think subscription also doesn't have to be one size, like you were saying, pricing. What pricing will work in India? See, India, I was just joking with someone, whatever you say for India is true. Like if I say $500 will work, it's true. If I say $1 will work, it's also true. Because India is so layered, this 1.3 billion, it's not a homogeneous country. So if you do different packaging for different audience, it will work. Today, India is getting ready, finally, where it is understanding that yes, if you get value, then I'm ready to pay. But you have to also understand the other narrative, which is very, very true for India. We don't like to pay for anything. The word is, though I'm not a fan of this word called jugaad, but it means is that if there is a software for designs, Adobe software, if I can get a pirated one, I will use that. And if Microsoft has that Word thing, if I can get an old one, which is not the new license, I will use that. So India is interesting that way. We are very value conscious. So if you have to ask us to pay as a market, then there has to be a very clearly defined value that you're giving.
Great. Just in case anybody was wondering about jugaad, it's the sort of ingenuity, the improvisation you see. It's like one day a salesman of washing machines went to these villages in Punjab to see how the washing machines were doing and found that they were being used very regularly, not for washing clothes, but rather to make lassi. So, that's the yogurt-based drink. So India is very clever.
But China is also like that, in Hong Kong. So we had 2 suitcases when we left from our hotel, the city, some royal garden in Hong Kong. And so we didn't know how in that red taxi, both my front and my luggage will go inside. And they had this wire and the bonnet was open and they had a wire, which I've never seen in India.
It's a Chinese jugaad too,
Yeah.
I just want to check whether there are any questions posted on Facebook that I need to be aware of, but so you can keep me posted. I saw Harish have his hand up.
Hello, my name is Harish. I'm an alumni MBA 2018 batch. I have 3 questions more close to relate to each other.
The first one is free. It's 100 RMB for
okay, sure. I'm in, because I'm exactly looking for answers to those, which I'm personally facing right now. I have my own startup, co-founded just 4 months ago. So we're very early stage. I'm pretty sure you also face these issues. One, how did you, because you mentioned you faced challenge explaining to investors, saying this is potential future, because they did not believe in it. So how did you convince might not be a painkiller right now, but it's a vitamin, but it's potentially could be meaningful something. So how did you not sell the story, but how did Jugaad do to convince them, saying this is something the future could look like? Second, the link to is they ask for traction. So how do you convince your customers to get the traction? Third, how did you convince your team in the early stage where, to go on this suicide mission, which allowed, to ask. So more or less related to each other as very early stage. You don't have anything. No brand, no name, no resource, not much money. So how did you tackle these personally?
So I don't know if I'll be the best person to answer this because I knew that nobody is going to give me money. So I never went and asked money. So if you see, I bootstrapped for 8 years. It was very hard. It was very long. It was very unsexy. Everyone around me was raising money. Everyone... there was a Hindi song. I had this thing that everyone who I had helped has become big, and people had. I was still the one who was helping people. People saw me as she's storytelling. Everyone, once you are a giver, everyone comes and takes from you and they expect you'll be right there. So for me, but I was very convinced, as I was answering to Fisher thing, that I'll be consistent, and once I'm profitable, once I have a clear path, then only I'll go to investors. So if you see, I started in 2008. I went to my first investor to raise money in 2015 because I was very clear how much money I will raise, at what valuation I will raise, and how I'll raise. So I was at a very different thing because I never want to do a venture where I'm dependent on a venture capitalist, because somewhere I'm not so young. I'm not a 20-year-old who gets excited by the news of, I raised $1 billion and I'm a unicorn. Those things are bullshit. It just comes and goes. And all of us perpetuate that myth around the world. So one is that. Second is traction. I'm very big follower of build a traction. I'm not saying traction can mean anything, but do you have a consumer? Do you have someone paying for you? I think it's a huge, if I had to tomorrow invest, or anyone for that matter has to invest in, and especially in today's market, because we have seen the euphoria of 2015 and then coming down, and then there's a sobering thing happening across the world, is that you really need to see that, hey, you have a paying customer, or you have someone who's really willing to put something. I think, I believe, and everyone who you meet more or less believes, until unless he's your father, relative, boyfriend, whatever. So that's very important, and you should expect that, because any guy who's putting their money in you should be able to see something besides great idea. And third is team. I think that's the only thing that you can get without money and without venture capital funding. Somewhere, again, just to answer what I told, is in terms of consistency. How many people are you hitting every day? How many people are you hitting? And what are you doing to hit different, very, very different? You know, we have a pattern matching. If I and you talk in a certain way, behave in a certain way, come from the same background, we generally tend to go after those people. I would say break that. For finding a co-founder, for finding a teammate, for finding an employee, you have to break that mold and say, I'm going to find someone who is just not like me. I'm going to go and get into different networks. I'm going to go in and get into different, like I found the first employee in YourStory was not even an employee, because I couldn't even pay, but I found a very smart student from a very prestigious engineering college who was frustrated with his job, and I said, I'm going to pay you very little money. He said, oh, for entertainment he joined, and then we became friends. And most of the people who joined in YourStory, and I'm a storytelling platform, they were all engineers. Can you imagine engineers interested in a story platform? But I found those crazy engineers who were frustrated with mechanical, computer. They wanted some sense. They saw method in the madness. And I went out for those mad. And people whom I thought will join, who are interested in stories, creative people, none of them joined. They all found this idea very scary. So I would say go. And again, I would say if you go to nurture relationship, partnership, go. For me, I agree when VCs used to say, oh, I'm going to only invest in companies with whom I can drink and get drunk. Somehow, as I'm getting old, I agree with that. Go find people with whom you can have green tea or get drunk, but network, because that's very human pattern, and I think that's limiting, that, oh, I know people in this room, I'm only going to network with. No, go somewhere, like come to India.
Arish is looking inspired. That's great. Please, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you. Please introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Pan. I could be the first guy who visited your office 2 years ago in Bangalore.
Oh.
My name is Pan Song. I was a former managing director of Fosun Group.
Oh, wow, yes.
We talked over phone.
Yeah.
Received by your colleagues.
Yes.
And thanks to your satisfaction for your invitation. Fortunately, we get it here. And I just have a simple question. How many numbers of for the new companies, I mean, or this new economies, will be IPO'd in NASDAQ in this or in the coming fiscal year?
So how many startups from India would
India? I mean, only India.
Will be IPO'd on the NASDAQ?
Yeah.
Specifically on NASDAQ?
Yes. Well, do you have any figures?
Yeah, I would say not anyone this year and next year. And I hope if someone proves me wrong, but I would say...
As you said that, there are some unicorn or growing up, right, in India. So I think that NASDAQ could be a very good place for exit.
Yes, it would be, but I think there are a lot of things. One is culturally, one is I think it is going to take time. I feel India is again, last 10 years have been a lot of building blocks. So though we have unicorns, but the unicorns have had to do a lot of building themselves, because if I am into food tech, for example, if I'm a Swiggy, which is into
Swiggy,
Swiggy, right, which is
I have met as chairman, founder. I have met as a founder.
Yeah, so it's a unicorn in India and it's just growing and it's getting a lot of international interest. But if I have a Swiggy, so if I have to build that business, besides being profitable, besides being everything, I also have to train and build that logistics supply chain, right? So it has required a lot of on the ground building. So I would say it will take another 2 years before we start seeing. There are lots of companies and lists, but I think they are going for their own good, for getting good value on NASDAQ. I think it's going to take another 2 to 3 years before we start seeing the companies. But if you're interested to know the names, who could be those, I could, yes, tell you those names.
Thank you, Madam Sharma. Thank you very much, Professor Shameen.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Urvash.
So I want to apologize before I start this question because this might be an antecedent to what entrepreneurs want to hear, and it's pertaining to my story actually. What I want to ask, or I'll tell you my story first, is when I graduated in 2006, I started my own venture because I had the entrepreneurial, I still have a bit of it actually, but I had the entrepreneurial bug back then. I started with a friend of mine in New Delhi, and it took us about 4 months before we started making any money, and by the end of the year, we were actually making a lot of money. And at that point in time, I realized that I am probably not well suited for running an entrepreneurial venture yet because I did not understand the landscape, I did not understand the business itself. So I decided to step out. And then a few years later, in 2010, 2011, I started another venture, wedding planning, in my city, which was miles away from what I could do. I started this with my mom, who was an excellent creative person. And then again, I realized that this is not the best thing that I want to do. Although it was very successful, it paid for my MBA, but I still decided not to go back into that. So here's my question. Do you have any stories with similar backgrounds? Again, I apologize for all the entrepreneurs in the room. You probably don't want to hear this, but what if you do realize that yes, even though you do have the entrepreneurial bug, and even though you do want to be an entrepreneur, but you're not the best suited for it. Yeah, do you have any stories pertaining to that? And like I said, it's probably not what everybody wants to hear, but it is very interesting to me because it's absolutely relative to what I went through.
So one, I have to congratulate you that you have ability of self-reflection, which is a very, very important thing because as we grow in life, we reflect about others. We are very fast to judge and reflect about others, but we lose touch with our own selves to reflect what we can do, what we might be interested in and what we might. And it also changes with years and time and everything. Yes, I know a lot of people who started up. Some of them are very successful venture capitalists. Some of them are working in startups in senior roles. Some of them have gone to corporates and said, oh, I never want to come back to startups because it's so chaotic and stressful. Someone, because at that stage of their life, they needed stability. They were building their families, so they wanted to do this, and they said that, okay, after some years, we'll come back when my kids have grown up. So I think it's an individual choice. I would say the ability to self-reflect and say that, hey, maybe not now. I started YourStory when I was 28. I am 2018 38, though I would like to say 32, but thanks. But unfortunately, I'm 38 now. But 10 years, a decade of my life, I have given to this. I have made certain life choices, lifestyle choices. Now, did I think about it when I started in 28 that I'll have to make those choices? No, but I've moved because this was the most important thing. So everything became second priority because this had to be the most priority, and I don't even regret those choices because this is So just to answer your question, I think it's to us what is at what stage important. right? And hats off to you to see. And I would say entrepreneurs are visionaries, but entrepreneurs, to build the most outstanding teams and successes, they need people who are not entrepreneurs. Otherwise, if you had a team full of entrepreneurs with an entrepreneur, you'll screw up big time.
Then I have hope.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Shraddha, there are people watching on Facebook as well, and there are a couple of questions that have come in. I guess this might be from someone who's not so familiar with India. How does the online business work in India? Is now a good time to start selling on Amazon?
Oh yeah, India is Amazon. Apparently, India is the biggest market now for Amazon outside of US. They have put 5 or 7 billion already, and I think it's an evergreen, perpetual money that is flowing in India. E-commerce, I think now the time begins for e-commerce. Walmart has acquired Flipkart. There is Amazon. There is Warren Buffett looking at investing in Paytm. I think it's a good time to be in India, to be selling. Because if you have something valuable, if you have something meaningful for Indians, it's a huge consumer base, right? We have as I say, 1.3 billion people, but out of that, if you look, we have 200 to 300 million people buying stuff, right? So, and this is just going to grow with the mobile penetration and Wi-Fi, which we didn't. Just to give you a context, India, we talk about big numbers, but one thing which Indian businesses or startups or people who come to India will say in the last few years have let us down is that you guys talk about big numbers, but when you come to actual transactions and everything, the size is very small. It's not 1.3 billion. And I'll tell you the reason for this is that we are not US and we're not China. Though we have Wi-Fi network, but it's very patchy. And it has been very broken Wi-Fi broadband ecosystem. But with Geo and everything in the last 2 years, I think India in the last 2 years has changed, and for the better. So now there's a huge population which is transacting online. Our Prime Minister held with the demonetization where everyone was forced to pay their taxes online. Otherwise, we don't like paying our taxes and online. So all those changes have happened in the last 2-3 years. And because of that, right now, great market. And I'm saying with full confidence, so try it out, and if it doesn't work, then you have me to say, oh, she bullshitted, but it's, yeah.
So you're willing to stick your neck out?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Great. And there's another question which is more about your own story. Did you know you were moving in the right direction, or do you see your own success story by looking back and seeing the dots connected?
You know, honestly, I've never seen, because of the pain and sufferings in my life, which have been many since childhood, there's a very schizophrenic brain that I have. At one part, I'm looking for success because we come from a very growing, emerging economy where aspiration is and all that is very important. But, you know, maybe many years back and now more so, for me, I don't know what success is. The question which I ask myself every morning, am I happy? Right? Like, am I really happy? And that's the only question that drives me. Like today when I took the flight, it was 2 hours delayed. And then I had turbulence on this Pacific Ocean coming to Shanghai. And I was like thinking, oh my God, the flight might just go in. And I might not go to Shanghai and my ghost will roam around Pacific. The question is, because you just start living in moments, because I have seen hugely successful people from across the world. I know many of them very well. And the more I get to know, I just feel that they're not happy. So what is that definition where the world thinks that they're successful because they made that kind of money or their names came in the newspaper? That doesn't. So to answer your question, I started since many years chasing that I'm going to be happy. How less frustrated can I be? How less angry can I be? How less liar can I be? And how happy can I be? And that way, if you ask me today, I think I'm in a great place. I'm mentally in a very amazing place. I'm very happy, and I just think my story has just begun. I'm ready to run for next 10 years.
Wonderful, I think. Let's hope more of this continues. Okay, folks, time flies when you're having fun, and we're sort of getting into the last 15 minutes of this event. And we also need to have some wrap-up comments at the end, and I think the Indian Association would like to say a few words. But I think we might have time to squeeze in one or two questions before that.
Are you asking me, is it a trick question? Are you judging my mental capacity, my depth of knowledge, or so I would refrain from answering specific company names because I know the companies you have mentioned. I know the promoters very well, and so I wouldn't give my judgment per se, but I would say, is it a good time to invest in ventures like that? Specifically, content-driven platforms which are investing in local languages? Absolutely. Please let's not forget the cultural context. In India, in China, you speak with great pride Chinese. If you go to Germany, you speak with great pride German. But in India, because we were subjugated in 1947, English became the currency of advancement of getting a job. Now, since this government has come, finally with the economy doing very well, we are going back to our basic roots where we have, I don't know how many languages, but 22 big languages in the country. So just to give you a context, one language in India, which is Bengali as a language, that's the overall number of people who speak Italian, right, or Portuguese. So that's the huge base. And is there an opportunity? Absolutely. And I think that's the blue sea. That's like the real blue sea one should get and dip into, because that's only going to grow. Because see, markets like US and everything, it's like, it's an English base, it's the same thing. We have Facebook, but who's building for this market? And this is like 600 million, 700 million people. And that's huge. And nothing is there right now. And it's just, everyone is taking a dip into the market. But one has to go and build, and the big opportunities are going to come. So to answer your question, absolutely. I'm not going to mention company specific. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think you're going to get the last question before.
Thank you.
That'll be a good one. No pressure. No pressure.
Thanks for sharing, Shradha. I'm Alana from IB06. I'm just a bit curious because back to 7-8 years ago, I worked for managerial consulting. I did a few cases in India for M&A. So at that moment, which one of the things that me really mad is about the government policies and procedures. So one of the deal which is finished within 9 months, just for government procedures. I'm just curious right now for the startups, entrepreneurs, what are the guiding policies, supporting, guidance and supportive, even fundings, all these relating, things from government to support these kind of startups?
In the past, in her experience of India, in her consulting work when they were doing M&A deals in India and so on, the red tape and everything was so great. It took 9 months in one case just to deal with this sort of thing. What is it like for entrepreneurs these days?
You felt the same, we felt the same in India, right? So it's like, it's frustrating even, like I can imagine, but being in India, it was also very frustrating for us. But the best thing about being an Indian is, and I feel I take great pride, we are very critical of our own self. So before you could say we are very, very aware that this has happened. But if you see in the last 3-4 years, it has completely changed. This government knows that it cannot survive and grow till it creates jobs. How is job going to come? Like how suddenly great jobs will come for so many amazing engineers who are graduating. It's going to come when we have more startups. How are startups going to grow? When they get investing, when they get funding, when they get partnership from across the globe. So out of necessity, now once you look at India, things have, I wouldn't say that, it's like the immigration. I landed in Hong Kong, immigration was like 5 minutes, and I was like, wow. So right now, if you go to India, it's not going to be 5 minutes, but definitely not what you had, because this government knows they're going for election next year. and the economy is getting up now, so they know that we have to have startups. There's no other option, and we have to make it easy, because any negative noise leads to a lot of repercussions. So you'll see a change. The changes, yeah, at ground, yes, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, at the risk of being a taker rather than a giver, if I can squeeze in one last question which has come in online. Any advice for those who really want to be an entrepreneur but don't have a concrete idea yet?
Oh, yeah.
Don't?
Just, I would say nobody, like ideas are like dime a dozen, yeah. So you can keep on thinking, experimenting. Somehow, what I've seen across the world and with people, it's just not the idea at all. So you keep on thinking of ideas, see if you like it. If you get bored, leave it, dump it, start something else. I think what you have to figure out is what is it that you're ready to sweat it out for many years. It's like relationship. You date a lot of people. You like to go out for dinner and then you get bored but then you suddenly hit and meet someone with whom you think, okay, I can screw my life forever because this is something, the pain is worth the moments of happiness. So you'll have to just the strike ratio and just find that. And because at the end of the day, it's not going to be about your idea. It's going to be only about your execution. And, we are looking at the Elon Musk news and everything across the world, right? It's going to be about execution. So you can keep on changing your ideas as long as you have a deep-rooted, crazy sense of execution. And I think the good thing about India and China is that we are very execution-driven economy. China better than India, but yeah.
Well, Shraddha, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing from you and chatting from you. A lot of what you said resonated with me when I'm standing in a classroom like this for the entrepreneurial management course. Hopefully my former MBA students here will back me up on this. One of the things I keep saying is, our problem is that the media gives disproportionate attention to a small number of outliers and gives us a sense of what an entrepreneur ought to be, when in fact, the vast majority of people who venture into this area are going to have much more ordinary, but potentially highly satisfying and successful experiences. And that the key really is about persistence, like you were talking about, execution. And I think you added another thing that I should mention in my class, which is being shameless. I thought that was very interesting and very good. And I'm going to be thinking about how I might apply that in the not too distant future. But I think more than anything that you said, what I was very struck by was the authenticity that shone through in everything that you have done in the past, all that you've shared with us, the way in which you have addressed our questions, and I think we will all be leaving this room feeling enriched for having been here. So thank you.
You're very nice and you're very kind. Thank you so much. Thanks. It is a great honor, and now I will be shameless and say, if you guys can just click YourStory.com, then I'll get some visitors from China.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's show our appreciation for Shraddha.
And I have one more request. Can we all take a photo together so I can show in India that we met? Interesting.
We will certainly do that, but I think the Indian Association will probably want to say a few words at this point, and then we can all get together and do that.
First of all, thank you very much, Cedric and Professor Shameen, Urvash, for making this happen. I must also thank Charmin, who is also doing a great job here. We're all in touch for long. And I also thank Professor Rama Velimuri, who brought me in touch with all the wonderful teams at CEIBS. CEIBS Indian Association has been doing the business mixers. We had a mixer last month with the president of NDB, the New Development Bank, Mr. K.V. Kamath. And that's how we thought we'll do mixers in Pudong. Shanghai is too big. We have a big river dividing. So sometimes people say that, you do mixers in the Puxi side. Mostly we do at the Indian consulate. But what about Pudong? Pudong is a big Indian population and also a great school here. So we said, okay, fine, we'll have a partnership with CEIBS and do it here. And Shraddha was traveling here. I was supposed to meet her last month in Bangalore, which we missed, but luckily she was here. So we just got hold of her and said, okay, fine, we'll try to have. So she's having another talk tomorrow in Puxi at the Indian consulate. We have a less space there, already sold out. But if anyone you feel who want to come again tomorrow, do come and just, enjoy a different topic as well. But just wanted to mention that Indian Association, Indians, we have around 5,000 Indians in Shanghai. And very lovely community, and a lot of people study in CEIBS as well every year. I think Cedric and Urvash was telling me around 10, 12 people from India study every day. And a lot of people don't know about the Indian community in Shanghai. So what Indian Association did was that last year we took a project. We have published a book in association with the Shanghai People Association of Foreign Friends, and it's the government support, a history of Indians in Shanghai. I'm going to give that book to Shraddha because when she's going back, she can read to connect the dots back. And probably if any one of you are interested, we'll leave the a book copy, or maybe you can order that as well. So great to talk by Shraddha. Thank you very much. You have to carry a little bit, right?
No, I'm saying it's a huge book.
Oh, okay. So this book has been edited by an Indian author based in Hong Kong and Professor Zhang Ke from Fudan University. It captures the history of 150 years of Indians in Shanghai. And I'm sure that when Shraddha wants to expand your story in China, which she will definitely get a lot of value from this thing. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Shradha Sharma. Thank you, Professor Shameen. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. I would invite you to come on stage to take a picture with the speaker while I give Shradha a small appreciation of today. Please come on for a picture. All together. All together.
But this is